Okay, there we are. We're live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Self Publishing Insiders. I'm Jim Azevedo. I lead corporate communications and marketing here at Drafted Digital. And today we're welcoming back Kristina Stanley of Fictionary. I'm so happy to have you here, Kristina. Um, so, if you don't know Kristina, Kristina is an award-winning author and fiction editor. If her name sounds familiar to you, that's because she's the founder and CEO of Fictionary. If you don't know what Fictionary is for creative writers who want to hone their writing skills, connect with other writers and editors, and self-edit more effectively. Now, one of the reasons that we're here to talk to Christina is because of her most recent publications, which include the Secrets to Editing Success, Secrets to Outlining a Novel, and her latest, Secrets to Writing a Series, which is what we're here to talk about today. But not only the book, but her upcoming 6-week course series, Foundations, How to Structure Your Entire Book Series, which runs, if I got this right, August 28th to October 2nd. Kristina, welcome back to the podcast.
Hello, Jim. It's so nice to be here. I always love coming on Drafted Digital.
Well, we love having you. Obviously, we want you back to share the goodness of everything that you're doing.
It's very flattering.
Well, it should be flattering. And I'm going to flatter you some more if you don't mind.
Oh, no.
Because your books, Kristina's books, everybody, they consistently show up on our bestseller lists week in and week out. And maybe last time we told you this, Kristina, you're like, what? Really? I didn't know that. But the secrets to writing a series, the last time I looked for last week, last time Mark and I looked, it was like number 10. And that's out of a lot of books. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I've been using Drafted Digital for years now, and it's very
Aw,
exciting to see all three of my nonfiction books, kind of are sitting around number one to number 10 to eight, like in that area every week. And you think it's so exciting. And part of that, I think, is the global distribution through Drafted Digital, right? It's hitting all the platforms. So it's not limited just to one. And the books look good. The print books look professional. All of that stuff helps when you're trying to sell your books.
right. Well, thank you for that. But the books themselves, I mean,
Yeah, it has to be a
they're
good book. Of course,
very,
yes.
they're very, very good. I mean,
Thank you.
just reading through the table of contents, they're structured very well. They have superb flow. I mean, the language. I was reading through secrets to series writing yesterday, and it was like, oh my god, this is perfect because the language is. It doesn't assume that you know anything about writing a series, but at the same time, it doesn't really talk down to anybody. It's like, here's what it is, here's how you do it,
Yeah.
and it just like I felt like there was a hand reaching out from the book, holding my hand and guiding me along.
Thank
That's not easy to
you.
do.
No, and you know what? We get that comment a lot, and it started so when I
Really.
developed Fictionary, the software, it was the same thing, that story editing, structural editing of fiction for me,
Hmm.
I found really hard, and I had all these spreadsheets, and it was so complex, and my goal was to take it and make it simple, and so that's what we did with the software. But then, when writing the books, what we do is we have a range of beta readers. So some who are at the very beginning of their writing journey and don't
Hmm.
understand terms even. And that was one of the things when I started, I'm like, structural editing? What? I don't know what that is.
Yeah,
Of
oh, yeah,
stage editing? That's interesting. What are these things?
yeah,
And so it's very easy when you get into it to start talking in a way that anybody who's newer doesn't get it. And so we
yeah.
have beta readers from beginning who are just starting their journey, and others
Hmm.
who are very experienced. And so then we try and put it in, and our goal is to go, here's a piece of theory. Here's what you do with that theory. Because there's many books that you read and you think, great theory. I don't know what to do with that. And my
Yeah, or
favorite
what
is
is it?
your protagonist likable. And you think, I like her. I don't know what
Yeah.
that means, right? And so we tried really hard to do it in a way that here's your theory, and this is what you actually do in your manuscript, and here's why. Off you go and do
Hmm.
it. Now that you've done that, here's your next piece of theory. Go do that. And so you can go through the books and start somewhere where you can manage it and not be like, how do I write a series? It's so big. I'm already overwhelmed that I'm on book one.
Yeah, yeah. And then one thing I love reading nonfiction. I read nonfiction more than anything else. And one thing that can kind of bug me if it's a new author I'm not used to is if I'm reading through it and then there's some term or some theory that I feel like I'm supposed to know, but I don't know, and then I'm completely turned off, like, oh, I'm a
Yeah.
big dummy. I don't know
Well,
anything here. I'm gonna move on to something else.
yeah, and our goal is really to motivate people. Like this should be fun and exciting, and it's usually a passion for
Totally.
peas when it starts. And
Hmm.
if it's part of your passion, it's very hard when you think, I can't do this. I don't know what this means and stuff. And so we're trying really hard to make it clear for everybody. And I just want to do a shout out to Elaine Cannon. She's here from the Fictionary community. I can see her in the chat.
Hey, Lane. Now we've talked about Fictionary before, but I feel like we'd be remiss if I didn't give you at least a minute to talk about Fictionary, just for the people who are uninitiated to what Fictionary is. Let's talk about that just real quickly. But I want to remind everybody that we have a couple of episodes on Fictionary. If
Yeah.
you're interested in learning more about Fictionary after Kristina talks a bit about it, episode 107 from December of 2022. I can't believe it's been almost 2 years since that episode.
Yeah.
And then episode 166 we did just earlier this year on February 1st. And you can find those really easily by going to our YouTube channel and just doing a quick search on Fictionary. So tell us what Fictionary is, what it does, who it's for.
Yeah. So Fictionary is for anybody who's writing fiction, any genre. And we're basically three things. We're software.
Hmm.
And our software helps you perform a story edit. So it's looking at the story structure, characters, plot, and setting. We don't do any copy editing, any formatting, nothing like that. It's just about getting a story. So you have a good, strong story, and then
Hmm.
you can move forward. And it's very visual. It shows you, here's your story arc in a graph. Here's your word count per scene. So you can look at balance. Here are all your characters in a scene. Here's how many scenes your characters are in. Here's your order of your point of view characters. And so you can
Yeah.
actually see it. And sometimes it's a shocker when you think, wow, when you look at a Word document, you go, okay, that looks pretty good. And then you see it structured out and you think, wow, I have 3 to 4 scenes in every chapter except chapter 10, and there's 17 scenes.
Yeah.
That's going to seem weird when the reader reads it. And the instructional fixtures just break that up. It's super easy. But if you can't see it, you don't even know it's there, right? And so it does a lot of visual things. We've just incorporated AI, and we have a very
Hmm.
um, I love using AI to help edit. So what we do, so we
Hmm.
never touch the manuscript. We don't use the manuscript for training. We never touch any prose. So that's completely the writers. They're the artists, they do it. What we
Yep.
use it for is to analyze a scene. So we'll name every scene through the whole manuscript. So you get an after draft outline in 30 seconds, 10 seconds,
Hmm.
whatever it is. Or it will show you here's the tension and conflict in the scene or not, or here's your scene structure. So your entry hook, the point of view goal, your middle, your climax, and an exit hook. Do you have those in your scene? Good job, move on. Or it sees something else as an entry hook,
Love
so
it.
maybe do something. And so we're trying to use AI in a way that the author remains the artist,
Hmm.
and but the AI does the kind of drudgery stuff that who wants to name all their
Yeah.
scenes, but it's really important to do that kind of thing. So
Yeah,
we're
that
trying to
makes
use it
perfect
that
sense.
way. So that's the software. Then we have this glorious community. We're about 3,300 members right now, super active. Our motto is kindness, and everybody is in there to help each other write and edit. And that's the goal of the community. Yeah,
Yay.
I know. I love
Kindness.
it. I love it. I love it. And then we have Fictionary Live, which is our online training courses, which are they're live, they're non-recorded, so that we work on actual manuscripts. And so we have one for writing a series where you sit down and you build the foundation for your series before you start writing. And it's all done by instructors trained by us. And so we're kind of trying to do the software to help you, the community to motivate you, and the classes to teach you. And then hopefully that makes everybody a better writer and better books for me to read.
I love the visual component because I feel like when I'm writing, I have a picture in my head, but
Hmm.
it's in my head, so it's just kind of like it's floating around and doing weird things. But having it in front of you, it's got to be so helpful. And then
Yep.
the community aspect. I mean, gosh, that's what I love the most about indie publishing is this:
Hmm.
we're all here for each other,
Yep.
no matter what level you are.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Today, though, we're talking about series and series structure. Christina, we talked about this a little bit in the backstage in the green room when we were, eating our M&Ms and stuff, get ready for today's show. Why are we talking about series? Why are series so important? And why does structure matter?
Yeah. So that's like a great big question for me. Is that what you just threw out there? So
Surprise! Hey.
surprise. So we're talking about series because, as it turns out, writers who write in a series um, can often make quite a good living at it. So you get to make a living at what you're passionate about. Some people, quit their day jobs completely and go fully that way. I've got lots of writer friends who are doing that. Some people do half and half. Some people are doing
Mhm.
it just as an add-on to their existing career because they love their existing career too. Also
Yep.
great. But writing a series, if you can capture a reader for book 1, you have them. They're waiting for book 2 and book 3, right? They
Yeah.
already like you. And so when you come out with the next books, a little bit easier on the whole marketing thing than that first book where, of course, we all struggle with it because nobody knows who we are and you're trying to get your book out there and stuff. But
Sure.
a series is a way to really make a living off your writing and um, to write about what you're passionate about repeatedly. So it's, I don't know, it's a win-win.
Yeah, well, for sure. And our good buddy, our mutual friend, Mark Leslie the Fave, is in the comment section, and Mark knows because we see this week in and week out that, and we watched this way back in the Smashwords days, is that books that are part of a series tend to sell better than standalone books.
Yep.
And the reason I said week in and week out is because Mark puts together our bestseller lists, and we send our
Right.
bestseller lists out to several partners like Fictionary and Fable, not to mention some media out there. And correct me if I'm wrong, but week in and week out, I'm seeing probably 75, and it kind of fluctuates, but usually 75 to 85% of all the books on these bestseller lists are part of a series every single week. 75 to 80%
Yeah.
to 85% of these books are part of a series. So series books are super duper important. And I think a lot
Mhm.
of that comes back to, when a reader buys your book and becomes engaged in a book that's part of a series, they're not just investing their time and money in these books. They're investing just a little piece of their soul. They're
Mhm.
investing, they're invested in your stories.
Yeah.
They're invested in the world that you've created. They're invested in your characters and your characters' lives. They're into it.
Yep.
So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah. So, on the structure thing, um, so I'll just talk about the story arc just a little bit. So in a single book,
Please.
there's a story arc, and all commercial successful fiction have these 5 scenes in their story, and the placement varies a bit. Sometimes it's before the story starts, whatever, but there are 5 scenes
Hmm.
in a single book. So if you're just doing a standalone book, you've got your inciting incident, and all that it is the moment in the protagonist's life, something shakes up their life, it's changed, something's happening.
Yep.
And the reason that's important, if that doesn't happen, we're just reading about somebody's ordinary life. It's boring, and you'll know it when you're reading, you think, "What is this book about?" You keep going and finally think, "I don't wanna read this," because there hasn't been an inciting incident. And today, because of free samples, which come in about 10%-ish, somewhere between there and 15,
Yeah.
if there's not an inciting incident there, you'll have readers who read the sample and think, dull, next." So an inciting
Yeah.
incident, super important. And if we think of a very famous example, Hunger Games, the inciting incident is Katniss volunteers for the Hunger Games. Well, that's a pretty big shakeup. Boom, off she goes. Her life has changed, right?
Hmm.
After the inciting incident, there has to be a plot point 1. And a plot point 1 is where the protagonist accepts the story goal. So, if we look at Fourth Wing, the protagonist is Violet, and her story goal is to use her intelligence to survive first year as a cadet in the Riders Quadrants. It's a fantasy about dragons and Riders Quadrants. They ride dragons.
Hmm.
That's her goal. So plot point 1, she has to accept the goal of surviving because she goes into it initially thinking, well, I'm just going to die. I'm this tiny little person and I'm not strong. And I used to be a scribe and
Hmm.
I can't do this. And she has to accept to actually try. And so that's plot point 1. And if she doesn't, then all we're doing is back to another ordinary world where she's just accepted she's going to die and she's going to die. So there's no story, has to be there. Then we get to the middle point where lots of people struggle. And the middle
Yeah.
point, all that is where the protagonist gets proactive instead of reactive. So when they accept the story goal, events happen and they do something. So they're still active, but they're just reacting to this or to that. Then At the middle plot point, they learn something, they do something, or something happens, and they start to drive the story. So instead of waiting for something, they're doing something. And then this causes all kinds of problems, of course. And if they don't do that, they can't get to the climax because they're just going to react, and the story will never end. Then you get to plot point 2. This is my favorite plot point because it has 2 things it has to do. And one, it brings the protagonist to the lowest of the low in the series. And so I'll just stick with Fourth Wing for a minute. Spoiler alert coming, but it's a pretty famous book. So in plot point 2, she kills somebody, and she's tried to avoid killing somebody. And there's killing all through this book, right? And she's trying not to, and then she does. And so for her, that's low for her because she didn't want to be a person who kills other people. But the other thing about plot point 2 that is super important, it gives the final piece of information the protagonist needs to win at the climax. If they don't get that information, they can't win, and the story will never end. So you have to have it there. And it could come a little bit before, a little bit after the plot point, but it's in that area. And that, in this case, Violet learns she can use lightning. That's her signet. She can use lightning. She can't control it. It's all over the place. It's a disaster. It's got a limitation, but she can use it. And she needs that knowledge for the climax. And then the climax scene has to answer the story goal. And if it doesn't, the story's not over. And so that's what I mean by structure. That's a structure. If you have those 5 scenes, you know anything else all around it, but that's your story and you know you have a story. So here comes the kicker. This is the biggie. When you're
get your pens and pencils ready.
Get your pens and pencils ready. This is really important. So if you're writing a closed series, and a closed series is something like Hunger Games, one story told over 3 books. So it starts in book 1 and it ends at the end of book 3. There, you have a story arc for that series. So there's an inciting incident for the series. There's a plot point 1, a middle plot point 2, and a climax that goes across the series on the top. And then each book has a story arc. So now if you're writing a series of 3, you've got 4 story arcs because you've got to have that overall one because the series needs a structure just like the book needs a structure, which is why I went into that big, long description of what's the structure of a book, because now you have to take it and structure a series. And that's how it goes.
Yeah, I think most authors, especially newer authors, don't realize that there's so many. I mean, I think when I first started kind of writing, I thought maybe think about writing books, it's like super clueless. Like, no, you actually have to follow a structure. Same thing goes for music and writing records and writing songs. There are reasons that there are editors and producers and all that stuff because your readers or your listeners, they're used to things coming in a certain order and following a certain pattern. And if you go off of that, it's not that you're losing your creativity, but you're going to lose your audience.
Yeah. Now, I just want to answer, Bobby has a great question. What about novels that can span 20 books? Okay, there's 2 types of ways that happens. One is for an open series. So Hunger Games is a closed series. There's one story in a finite number of books. If we look at Jack Reacher, for example, or the Stephanie Plum series, a lot of crime series with detectives, there's a different story in each book, and there is not one overriding story arc, right? So it has, it's called an open series because it keeps going. You can have 20, 30 books, whatever you want. So that's open. Then we get into the mixed area, which is getting quite advanced. But if we look at a series like A Court of Thorns and Roses.
Okay. When you say mixed, do you mean mixing like a closed series and with an open series?
Yes. Okay. So then you extend, and what can happen? So I suspect, and this is just my opinion, in A Court of Thorns and Roses, the first 3 books are really Fair's story. And so there's a story arc for those 3 books. Then the books go off to the protagonist changes to other characters in the series, and it's their story. And so she can continue that on forever. And so pretty much what she's done is a closed series. She's won her audience. People love it. Well, she's finished the story. So what do? You think, I've got all these other great characters and storylines that come within this. I can now, it's sometimes referred to as a spin-off, but you just call it's part of the same series, and on you go. Bridgerton is another great example. There's 8 siblings, 8 books, but she could totally expand that and go, all right, I've done the Bridgerton siblings. I can now, I'm going to add the cousins or the aunts and the uncles or, whatever. It doesn't matter.
Uh-huh.
She could keep going endlessly, and it would still be a series based on the Settington and the historical romance theme around it.
Love it. Okay, I'm gonna bring up a couple more questions here. This question here from Atomic Elf 1. Thank you for your question. Any specific insight into serial fiction?
Yeah, so serial fiction, what I
Maybe
think,
we should define it first for people.
yeah, so it's tricky because it's how do you define that differently? Let's just see. The trick is to get somebody to read. And I'm thinking of like Vellum, from Amazon, and there's somebody else that does serial fiction, right? And so what serial fiction is you're basically putting out one scene or one chapter at a time, like it used to be when people wrote in a newspaper. And so the reader only gets that. So the
Yeah,
difference between the series, they know they're getting a series. So the reader picks up their novel, like I get this novel, and then I'm going. When you're reading serial fiction, you're reading a very small piece and waiting for the next installment from the author.
right.
And the biggest thing for serial fiction is an exit hook at the end of every scene. What's going to make the reader want that next episode? And you can think of soap operas on TV. There's always that dun 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 at the end of
Little
someone's
cliffhanger.
dead. You don't know who. You got to wait till the next day or the next week or whatever they're doing. But it's that sort of thing. And so you have to be more careful about exit hooks going into the next scene that readers want to wait for it.
Yeah, and be real explicit that this is a serialized
Mhm.
novel. Because some people don't like cliffhangers. They want to know upfront that this is going to go into this next.
Yeah, and
in the-
I
in the next
kind of suspect a little bit people reading through Amazon Vellum they know it's serial
I
fiction and they
know.
like it.
Right.
And that's what they're reading it for, versus when you're reading a novel, you expect that story in that novel to end. You want the satisfaction. You know what the protagonist wants to do, and you want to see if they do it or they don't do it in that book.
Perfect.
And over a
Okay.
series, you got a series goal and you want to see. So if we look at, I'll just go back to Hunger Games for a second. In the first book, survive Hunger Games is her goal for the book. But the series goal is to become the leader of the rebellion and take down the Capitol, even though she doesn't know it till like halfway through book 2. That's really her goal. That is her series goal. And so she's got a series goal as well as each book has a goal that must be addressed in those books.
Love it. Okay. I'm gonna bring up the next question. Usually I wait way too long before getting to all the questions, so I love how those questions kind of flowing in early. So
Fantastic.
thanks
Yeah.
everybody. William asks, how about series organized around the setting? Great
Absolutely.
question.
So, Bridgerton's a great example. That's around the setting. There's lots of Tanya French writes, I think it's Ireland detective novels, and it's different detectives. But it's always in the same city, and so
Hmm.
it's the same culture, the same environment, but different stories in each books, and that's her series. There's fantasy ones. Of course, I can't think of one off the top of my head, but there's a really famous one with turtles, and someone out there is going to know who I'm talking about. The World on the Turtles. It's not that famous, but it's like that too. And so you can absolutely do your series based on setting. And basically, to have a series, it's either going to be plot, which is a closed series, so it's a series because of the plot, or it's going to be your characters, or it's going to be your setting. Those are your 3 choices when you're bringing something together for a series.
Perfect. I'm going to jump down to the next question here. Oh, I just lost it. Oh, here it is. It's a good question from Misty. Are 2 books considered a series where the
Yes.
second book is a follow-up story of the first book?
Yes, that's a great question, Misty. It is called a duology.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
if you did a 3-book series, your midpoint of the series is going to be in the middle of book 2. If you're doing a 2-book series, your midpoint of your series is going to be the end of book 1. And so when you're doing your story arc, you're going to have an inciting incident and a climax for the series. And the inciting incident will be at the beginning of book 1. Climax will be at the end of book 2. And your midpoint is going to be right at the end of book 1. And it's a great way to give a hint, a hook of that protagonist now in book 2 is going to be very proactive compared to book 1.
Love it.
Terry
Comment from
Pratchett,
Atomic
sorry,
Elf
Lane
1
Candy
again.
came up with my thing. Sorry, Terry Pratchett.
Who?
That is what I'm thinking of.
Oh, Terry Pratchett. A comment here from Atomic Elf 1 who says, with Ender's Game, he told the exact same story from a different character's perspective in Ender's Shadow. So there's an example there, a brilliant example.
Yeah, and that's really good because what's happening there is, I mean, Ender's Game was such a beloved book, right? That it just people who love it, love it, love it. And so then people like this story, and then taking it and putting it out of the book from another
Mhm.
character's perspective is fantastic, right? Because now you get different insights and it makes you think about the first book differently because you're like, oh, that's what that other character was thinking when that was happening. And it can give you a whole different twist on the world and the story. And it's pretty exciting and hard to do, I think.
Oh, good points, good points. Bobby here brought up a question I was going to ask you about as well, so I'll use Bobby's question instead. Bobby asks, what about books that are companion books that give history or inner workings of the world as a journal by the main protagonist?
Yeah. So there, you still need a story. You still need to hook the reader. So even though it's the history, when you think of in a book itself, backstory, and you backstory that's really good, it's just kind of written as part of the story. And it's only the piece the reader needs to know to understand that story. And it adds tension and conflict, and you have empathy or you understand the character's motivation. It's there for a reason. So when you're doing companion books, they have to be just as interesting and exciting as the original book. So I don't know. I think it's hard, and the authors who can do it, kudos to them, because you still need a bit of a story, or it's like reading a textbook, which may be
So
fine.
do you find that companion books or novellas in between major releases of books in the series can help keep readers engaged? Is that something that you recommend, or is that something that you see a lot of
Oh,
authors
sure.
doing? I
There's
guess it depends on
lots
the
of
frequency too.
well, and there's even coloring books for some of the fantasy books out there, right? It's a companion coloring book. So
Cool.
think of, you're reading Harry Potter to your kid
Yeah.
and you're waiting for book 2 or book 3 or book whatever to come out. Oh, and out comes a coloring book, and you can do the
Yeah.
coloring book with your kid. So there's all kinds of ways to keep the reader engaged. I just saw with Fourth Wing, they came out with um, uh, a book with like graphic design within the book, a new edition of Fourth Wing book 1 in it, because book
Mhm.
3 is not out yet. And so they've come out with a different variation of book 1, which is illustrated. That is the word I'm looking for. They have an illustrated version.
Yeah.
So you can see the publisher there putting that out to keep people interested while
Super
everybody's
smart.
reading book 3. So yes, of course, many different ways to boost your sales on different, um, whatever it is around your book that you can do.
Christina, is there a golden number when it comes to the frequency of releases in a series? I mean, I
Yeah.
imagine it depends on the author's writing style. It depends on the genre. Like if you're writing historical fiction, you've got a lot of research to do, and then
Yeah.
other genres and their readers demand, I want my book right now. Come on.
And okay, so that's a really big question. It
I'm
depends
sorry
on
about my big questions that keep going.
many things.
Jim.
So one of the
Yeah.
things is if you have a knockout first book and you get a publisher and you're traditionally published, they're going to want a book a year. And sometimes that's very difficult. When I was talking to one of the agents from one of our fictionary books,
Mhm.
she was telling me that it's quite often, someone spent 5-10 years on their first book and now they have to do book 2 in a year, and it's really hard,
Yeah.
right? So frequency there is kind of publisher dependent on what you agree to with them. If we go the other extreme, romance novels, particularly toward the Harlequin genre, readers expect 3-4 books a year, 5 books a year. They are just going through books. And so to catch them, you got to keep going. And we have an author in the fictionary community. She's done 160 books. And
Wow.
she can just write. She's just amazing. I actually interviewed her. I'm like, how in the world are you doing that?
Yeah. How's that even possible?
But she has a structure, she follows it, and so every story's different, but it follows the story arc structure, and she just goes with it, and she uses tropes, and so, cowboy in small town, or there's lots of tropes that you can use in the romance thing. different story, different characters, but use a trope, then you know the pattern, and then you can push out books. So the number of books, it really depends on who you are as an author, how you write, if you're going traditional or self-publishing, what genre you're writing. Fantasy tends to have a bit more of a break in between because they're longer books. A
Sure.
romance can be 50,000 and off you go, 60,000. If you're writing 100,000, 120,000 words, well, you can't crank out as many books as you can in the other genres. So I can't answer that in a straight up, it's this answer.
No, it is a perfect answer, because I also wanted to tell authors, like, don't kill yourself trying to crank out books, because if you do that, that's going to lead to burnout, and burnout is what leads to quitting. And we don't want any of you to quit. We want you to keep
Correct.
writing your books and enjoying what you're doing here. That's what it's all about. Because if you enjoy what you're doing, your readers are going to love your stuff.
Yeah.
Quick question here from Beth. Hey, Beth. Beth always has great questions. She asks, can you combine open and closed series into a series? For example, write a trilogy about a person 1 in setting A, and a trilogy about person 2 in setting A, and a trilogy about person 3 in setting A.
Sure. You can have your like a total world. So your setting A is your world, right? And so then what you're doing, what you have to be careful of there, when you do that, you've picked a world, and some you're going to do like one duology or a trilogy in that world, and then you're going to do one open series. What's important, the reader's going to expect your world rules stay the same. So if gravity shoots you upward instead of downward in the world, it has to always do that. You can't switch between books. And so I recommend you keep a journal of your rules, like your world rules, and you make sure in every single book, if your series are all based on the setting, your setting has laws, it's got politics, it's, you know, the whole society, the culture, everything. It applies to all of them. And you can't all of a sudden in another book go, oh, I'm going to make it this way because the protagonist needs it and I can't see a way out of this jam. So I'm just going to change the rules. Readers will spot that in a flash. And then it's not good, I'll say.
Okay, great answer. Great answer. Of course, we're live, and so my dog spotted a cat outside. I think that's happened maybe once before. Let's keep going. I wanted to thank all the viewers for all your questions this time. You guys are cranking out the questions. Lately, the questions have been kind of few and far between, but in this episode, thanks to Kristina, there's a lot of questions coming in, so I want to try to get to as many as possible. Guillaume asks, hey, Guillaume, thanks for joining today. Guillaume asks, my French spy novel, there's going to be 11 in that series. He's working on number 3 right now.
Okay.
How can I get people hooked on these, both in English and in French?
Okay, so the biggest thing, so if you look at your book 1 in the series, when you finish a book in a series, whether it's a closed or an open series, there needs to be a hook at the end of that book. So somewhere between, you know, the hook can happen kind of anywhere from plot point 2 to the climax to right to the final page, the last sentence, that there's something there that makes your reader want to read the next book. So let's assume you've written a very strongly structured book. People love the book. That's great. What you want them to do now is read book 2. And if you put too big a hook, so for example, let's say you've got 2 major characters, and in the last scene of book 1, there's a car accident, and the reader's left knowing one of them dies, and you don't say who. Too big a hook. If they're major characters, if a minor character is fine, but major characters, the reader's going to feel ripped off and think, well, now you're forcing me to go and read book 2, as opposed to encouraging me to read book 2.
That's
so
a great point.
We got to watch your hooks, right? That it's big enough that there's mystery coming, like what's going to happen, right? So, you know, at the end of Hunger Games, you see Katniss and Peter, they survive, they come back to District 12, and you know, they've had this very public romance that doesn't exist. And now you think, well, now what's going to happen, right? You know, they're not out of it. And there's enough of a hook there, both on the romance side and also on, she's come from a starving person, and now she has a whole bunch of money, and she's got to go back and be the mentor for the mentor games. And so, you know, that's coming, but her story is finished. And then you want to read on and see, well, now what does she do, right? So you need that kind of hook. The other thing, which is also very important because of free samples again, in the opening of book 2, book 3, all the books past book 1, the new ordinary world is changed. So there's going to be an ordinary world for the protagonist, but it will have changed from book 1 to book 2. And you need to show that quick. And the other trick is in book 2, don't show too much backstory. The Divergent series does it brilliantly from book 1 to book 2. And in book 2, in the opening scene, you see the protagonist and she's killed somebody and she's been shot. You don't know why she killed her friend, and you don't know why or how she's been shot. That's all the backstory you need to keep you engaged and going if you haven't read book 1. If you've read book 1, it's just a quick reminder and you're not repeating too much. So resist this temptation in book 2 to give too much backstory. And so when the ending of book 1 to the beginning of book 2 just totally flows and you keep it an exciting hook, but not too exciting, and don't do too much backstory, then you get people hooked on the next book.
Piece of cake.
Piece of cake. So easy. So easy.
Now, you mentioned before, Kristina, that, try to give 10%, try to give a 10% sample for all of your books. Now, let's say I've completed book 1, it's published, book 2 is coming out soon, I'm working on book 3. Do you recommend putting a sample chapter for book 2 and possibly even book 3 at the end of book 1, or is that too much? Should it just be,
If you do it, it's got to be brilliant, right? It has to be polished. You have to know that that scene is going to be exactly as you've written it in the next book. And if you haven't gotten far enough, I mean, I think everyone who's written a book knows by the time you get to the end, you go back to your opening image and go, yeah, that's not what I need at all. It's wrong. It doesn't fit the book. Why do I have that there? You're going to rewrite it, right? And I actually recommend the opening scene is one of the final scenes that you edit, because when you do a full edit and you go through and change everything, you come back and you go, I don't even need half of that. Or my book starts on scene 2. So if you do it, you have to be far enough along in the next book to know 100% that's the scene. It's got to be copy edited. It's got to be proofread. It's got to be just as professional as the first book. So you got to be really far along in the next book before it's not too risky to do that.
That's an excellent answer. I've heard that before from best-selling authors out there. And that's a good segue into a follow-up question that Atomic Elf had here. He says, does that mean that traditional publishers are looking for series that are already complete or have multiple books that are finished?
Yeah. So here's the thing that I've heard talking to a lot of agents, is they're more interested that your first book is great because you've proven you can write a book.
Yeah.
And when you go through that route, they're going to edit and they're going to change your story. And so then it makes it harder to change if there's a whole series written. So not necessarily that. And you can see the length of time in Fourth Wing for the third book to come out. That wasn't written at the beginning. It just wasn't there yet. So otherwise it would have been published by now. So, and it's going to differ from publisher to publisher. So I don't want to give just a straight up, it's this. But most of the agents I've talked to, I've asked them that, like, do you want to hear about the whole series? And their answer is no.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And my experience at conferences and talking to agents and editors too, they want to know that you can write, but they want to know, like, if you have an idea for a series, if you're thinking about a series, and then if you can kind of map it out for them.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Gosh, I mean, we are cranking through this, Kristina. These questions are good.
It's good.
Let's see. Bobby asked Bobby, you have some great questions. Bobby asked, you said before books can be on side characters, but can scenes do this? As in, each character is the buildup to the final meeting.
Yes. And Bobby, you put that in exactly the right way. So with that, here's what you want to do. Every scene in this story, you have your protagonist and they have a goal. And every scene in this story should move that protagonist closer to or farther away from achieving that goal. If it doesn't, question why it's in the book. So don't make it about a side character, but it's not related to the main plot. And even if the protagonist is not in the scene, so super easy example, you see the antagonist putting a bomb in the protagonist's car. And then the next scene, the protagonist has got to get from A to B and use their car. The scene with the antagonist is making it harder for the protagonist to achieve their goal, but the protagonist doesn't know about it. You as the author have to know that. It doesn't have to be in the book that's clear, but you as the author have to know, why did you put the scene in? So side characters all have a purpose related to the protagonist and their story goal. And if you question that for every scene for side characters, you'll know whether it belongs in your story or not.
So cool. Cranking through some more questions here. Thanks for the question, Bobby. Question here from Linda. Hey, Linda. Linda asks, any tips for writing an unplanned second story after the original was a standalone?
Yeah. Okay. So here's what I would do. I love this question. It's so good, Linda. This is what I would do. Go through your book one, find your inciting incident, plot point one, middle plot point, climax, sorry, plot point two, and the climax. Write down the main events that happened in those scenes and how did the protagonist react to those. Then you have a super high level view of your book, and then look at if you had a goal of so the Hunger Games, survive the Hunger Games, right? You look for something in those scenes that's a little bit open, and could you expand that into a goal for a series? And so that way you don't have to change anything. Your book one, if it's already published, it's published. I mean, you could take it down and rewrite it, but that's a lot of work. But if you just pull out your story arc scenes, those are the most important scenes in your story, and they tell you what that story is, and they will show you what's not in there that then you can transition into a series. And once you draw it, you'll see it. It's just there.
Great answer. And a lot of that stuff is covered in your book too. I mean, you literally walk through all of this, like all these little minute questions. I love it. We talked a little bit about this next question from me before we went live. And that question was, in your experience, Kristina, for newer authors, when have you seen books that are part of a series, a fictional series, start to gain some traction? And then same question for nonfiction, because it applies to nonfiction as well.
Yeah. So in fiction, basically, you want to have good sales on your first. Jim just fell over because he's so excited about his answer. He just can't wait. So what happens often is you get your first book out and it sells well. Reasonable, not like a huge bestseller, but it sells. Then when you do book two, those people will start to see like, oh, look, there's getting lots of reviews on this book and this book. I better read book one. And so it starts to roll backwards, that if people keep reading, it's like if you see a series on Netflix, for example, this is what I do. I look at like, oh, there's only one season. It came out in 2012 and they never did another one. Couldn't have been very good. I'm not watching it. But if there's a season 2 and a season 3, you think, oh, I'm going to watch that because clearly it's good. And you go, you watch season 1. Same thing happens with books that you start to build and then your books start to sell backwards. With, I can tell you my experience with my nonfiction books. So Secrets to Editing Success came out first and it sold well. And then Secrets to Outlining a Novel came next and it sold better. And then my sales for Secret to Editing Success started to pick up. And then when Secrets to Writing a Series came out, they're all selling better because people read the third one. They're like, oh, I like this. I'm going to go back and read the second one. Oh, I'm going to go back and read the first one. Yep. So nonfiction is different, but you can still build your reader audience because they see that you're having success in more than one book. They're more likely to invest time in you. And particularly, self-published authors still struggle a little bit with the stigma of, well, how do I know it's good? And if you have multiple books out that are being read and have reviews, there you go. And I think that's why so many authors are writing series right now, because they can be successful with it.
Yeah, and I've heard the advice for newer authors especially. It's like, hey, if you got that first book done and you're ready to publish, maybe a better strategy for you is to wait until you've got 3 up to 5 books kind of in the queue. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily done, but in the queue, ready to go, because every book that you publish out into the world is like a single fish hook in this ocean of books that are out there. But every book that you publish subsequently, they're all pathways leading back to this book and back to that book and back to you, the author.
And how glorious we get to write more books. It's fantastic.
Absolutely. Positively. Now, we only have a couple minutes left. That was quick. Do you want to talk about the course?
Yeah, so the course coming up starts on the 28th. And so it's basically it's how to structure a series. I'm just going to go quickly here and go to my list of what's here. But so we do 6 weeks. It's live. It's in Fictionary Live. So you come and join our community at fictionary.circle.so. And in there, if you have our Storyteller Premium subscription, which is our software, you can attend any of our Fictionary live classes, and we have them on outlining, we have them on writing, we have them on editing, and we have this one. We have one for fantasy specific, one for romance specific. And so we look at how to decide if your series is open or closed. Then we look at how to write your skeleton blurbs, which is just who's the protagonist, what's their goal, and what are the stakes if they don't achieve it, and how to do that for each book in your series. And then a series story arc we do across that. And then we look at bringing it all together. What do you need to do at the beginning? What do you need to do for resolutions? What about point of view? What about multiple protagonists? What about tense, etc.? All of those things, what you need to do for a series. And so that comes in. And for anyone super interested, we actually put a special together for everyone in Fictionary. If you go to fictionary.co/D2D series, so hopefully you can remember that.
I don't have that, but let me write that down real quick.
Fictionary.
So it is
fictionary.co/D2D series. And if you go there, we have a special that you get 6 weeks for free of the Storyteller Premium software. And in that, you can attend any of the classes that we have. But you can also, and particularly the series one, if you're interested in doing a series, come and see us in the community and come and join that. And then you can get super, super detail. Everybody who teaches there has been trained by me or one of my colleagues as a Fictionary certified story coach editor and a Fictionary certified instructor. And so they're fully trained on all of these topics, and they're live and they're not recorded. So you can ask questions about your specific manuscript, which is really fun.
Perfect. And that's how it should be. Now, before I forget, I want to make sure I put a link up to the book, the latest book.
Thank you. That's fantastic. Yeah. And again, I mean, it's all about theory plus action. Here's what you actually do. And then you just follow the process and you got a foundation for your series, and off you go and write it. And it's fantastic.
Right. And if you're not sure, like Kristina says, check out the first 10%, like check out the table of contents, read through part of the book, and I guarantee you'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, I have to get this book. You'll love it.
So Beth, the offer is good until August 27th because the course starts August 28th.
Well, so that's right around the corner.
Right around the corner. It's coming right up. Well, I figured, everybody who's here is interested in writing a series. Yeah. I'm assuming that a lot of people here are actually writing a series, so it's kind of relevant.
Kristina, you are a busy, busy person. So we really appreciate your time joining us today. What you're doing out there for your fellow authors is pretty amazing. You have a ton of resources at fictionary.co for people to learn. So fantastic. I'm sure the community appreciates that too. As we're wrapping up, I just want to remind our viewers here, if you could please like, share, comment, and subscribe to this channel. It's super helpful because it helps us spread the word across the indie community. It helps us get amazing people like Kristina in here to share her expertise with us.
Thank you.
Also, bookmark DDD Live so you can see every week we post what the topic is going to be and who our guest is, so you can be in the know for every week and every guest and every topic. And then finally, if you're joining us today and you're new to the indie publishing community, why not sign up for your free Draft to Digital account simply by going to draft2digital.com. Viewers, you guys were amazing today. Thank you for all the questions. You made my job easy. I was like, oh, am I going to ask, dumb questions? I don't know if I can keep this long. And you guys took over. You're like, we've got questions for you. We've got you, Jim. So thank you, everybody.
So fun.
Kristina, thank you again for being here, for sharing your expertise and your time with us, because we know you are super duper busy.
It's fantastic. How can I not support Draft to Digital? All my books are up there. It's where I make all my money. So I got to be here. It's wonderful.
Well, you're a best-selling author. So thank you for being here. And thank you for trusting us with your book babies.
Book babies, yeah. All right. Thank you, Jim.
Meet me in the green room. And in the meantime, I'm going to show this quick 30-second spot for DDD print. Bye, everybody. Hope to see you.
Bye, everyone.
Next
Thank
week.
you.
Ebooks are great, but there's just something about having your words in print. Something you can hold in your hands, put on a shelf, sign for a reader. That's why we created DDD Print, a print-on-demand service that was built for you. We have free, beautiful templates to give your book a pro look, and we can even convert your ebook cover into a full wraparound cover for print. So many options for you and your books. And you can get started right now at draft2digital.com.